Okay. Hello. If these things will ever actually work, if the technology will ever actually come together to work for us, we will get started here on this week's podcast. I hope things are working. It took a little bit to get the technology together. We welcome everyone in here on the Tuesday night live stream. We welcome you for listening to the podcast later in the week. You know how we do it here on the Panther-Lair Show, 8:30 p.m. On Tuesday nights, we go live at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We talk about everything going on in the world of pit sports, just whatever topics are out there, whatever comes to mind, whatever I happen to be thinking about this week, and whatever you happen to be talking about either on the message boards or on Twitter or whatever you want to bring up right here during the live stream. We talk about it, and I always say that's the fun of the live stream is you can get involved in the conversation. If you're in the live stream right now, if you're jumping in, we just got started. Welcome to the podcast, and there's that chat window, and you can put your comments there, and we can interact. And if I say something, you have a question, you have a comment, a reaction, you want to ask why there's a big black box on the screen, I can't explain that. Technology's not working. And by the time I finally got the program booted up that I use for the streaming software, I didn't have time to go back and try and figure out why there's a black box there instead of our most recent headlines from Panther-Lair.com. But if you want to see the most recent headlines from Panther-Lair.com, if you want to get the most comprehensive source of pit sports news in the internet, you go to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I always say it's the most comprehensive source of pit sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, we cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And if you're watching the live stream, we're starting. There we go. We've got our latest headlines appearing on the screen. Like I told you, the technology's not exactly working the way we would like it to, but there it is. It just showed up, and you can see some of the latest headlines we've got there at Panther-Lair.com. We have new content every day at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest pit fan friends. We've had a lot of great conversations already this week. I'm sure that'll continue through the rest of the week. And it's funny because it's almost sort of a surprise, I think, sometimes for pit fans when they come to the message boards, they come to the website, and they're like, no, there's still something to talk about. There's still something to do. There's still something to read and to discuss and to think about. And, I've talked so many times about the back and forth of optimism and pessimism regarding the prospects of a college football season being played this fall or being played at all. And we've talked about spring, and we've talked about shortened seasons and conference-only seasons and delayed starts and winter seasons and all these different possibilities. And, it's going to be very interesting to see. And I don't want to spend too much time on the pandemic and quarantine and sports, the sports impact of the pandemic tonight. I have other things I want to talk about on this week's podcast, but it's going to be interesting to watch. And we've got Major League Baseball starting, right? We've got the NBA and the NHL coming. We've got the NFL moving forward in whatever kind of way it's moving forward. And, we'll see where things are by Friday night when Major League Baseball starts. But as we sit here on Tuesday night taping this podcast, they're moving ahead. They're ready to play a season. And you would think that should create some optimism about college football. You would think that if these other sports can move ahead, then college football should be able to do it too. If Major League Baseball, if the NBA, the NHL, and even the NFL can do it, college football should be able to do it. But there's a problem, though, because it's not exactly the same. Because what Major League Baseball has been able to do, what the NBA and the NHL have been able to do, and what I imagine the NFL is going to try to do if they ever actually tell us that they've got a plan, is they've been able to put their guys in a bubble, right? They've been able to pretty much constrict and restrict where these guys go, what they do, who they interact with, and who they come in contact with. And it seems effective. The NBA, even though they had some guys breach security to go pick up some delivery food, the NBA has kept things under control. The NHL has been able to deal with it. Major League Baseball, when they've had a positive test, they've been able to deal with it, quarantine the guy, get him separated, get him healthy, and get him back in the mix and prevent spread. Now, once they start playing games and they're going to different cities and they're interacting with different people, it'll be a different story, or it could be a different story. We'll see what happens there. But they seem to have a plan on how to keep it contained, how to mitigate the situation and not allow spread to happen or prevent spread as much as you can. NBA and NHL too. They seem to have a good plan. I just don't think it's a viable plan for college football because of the first word in that sport, college. You went to college. I went to college. You're not keeping me in a bubble in college. They're talking about students have to quarantine for 14 days when they first come back to campus before they can go to class. What are you talking about? College students. Arguably, I'm not going to say the dumbest population on earth because I don't think they're dumb, but the least willing to be controlled population on earth. I mean, how good were your decisions? How good was your decision making when you were in college? And you want to say, well, college, football student athletes, they've got more riding on it. You know what I mean? They've got potential professional implications of, riding on whether or not they play this season. Well, yeah, that's fine. And has that stopped college football student athletes and college basketball student athletes and college sports student athletes from making bad decisions in the past? I mean, you're not creating a bubble for college students, and not student athletes. You're not creating a bubble where you can keep these guys separate from the rest of the population. You're not doing it, academically. You're not going to be able to keep them out of classrooms, and you're not going to do it recreationally. You're not going to be able to keep them out of Oakland. No matter what you do, no matter where you put them, they're going to find their way to interaction with other students. And that's why it's still, I'm encouraged by how the other sports have moved forward. I'm encouraged by the direction things seem to be heading with the professional sports. But I still think there's a million questions when it comes to college athletics. And they're going to expire every single one of those questions. They're going to try to answer every single one of those questions because there's so much money riding on it. And I'm talking about the sport administrators and the athletic directors and the college presidents and all those things. But they're going to try to answer them all. I don't think they will leave any stone unturned. It's above my pay grade to figure it out. I don't have the answers on it at all. Few comments and questions in here about some of this stuff. Josh Newark asked, what do you think Heather Lyke is testifying about tomorrow? Where's she going? Washington, D.C., testifying in front of Congress. I think it's about like the name, image, likeness situation or not situation, the name and image and likeness rights, and allowing college student athletes to leverage those rights and get sponsorship deals and all those kinds of things. That's what I believe she's there talking about. We're actually hoping to be able to talk to Heather Lyke at some point this week, and I would hope that we can, ask her some of these questions. But it's going to be, we'll see what comes out of that. But I believe that's the topic at hand. Dale Gribble says there will be football. I know everyone was surprised about the NCAA tournament, but basketball doesn't compare to football in America. You're right, Dale. And there's a different situation. The NCAA tournament was right in the middle of everything. We've had 4 months since then, 5 months since then to try and figure things out and come up with a plan. I don't know that they've actually figured anything out in the last 4 months. But I will, say that you're right. Football is very different from basketball. Basketball, that's a huge, huge moneymaker in the NCAA tournament. It took a lot to get that thing canceled. I think the biggest difference is the amount of time that has passed. If you want to talk about, yes, they canceled the NCAA tournament. That doesn't mean they'll cancel college football. Well, I would just say that it means you can't take anything off the table. When they canceled the NCAA tournament, that to me said, okay, nothing is guaranteed for the next year. And college football is in that, it's included in that. That's not guaranteed. Josh Newark says college football can do this if you pretend that these are still amateur athletes that don't have academic requirements. Yeah, I don't know, Josh. It's really tricky. If you're going to have the college environment, the question even goes beyond sports. The question is how can you have the college environment, the standard traditional college environment, and not have outbreaks and spread? That to me, I can't get my hand. I can't figure that one out. Yeah, and again, Pitt is going to have, and all these universities are going to have people trying to answer all these questions, but I don't have the answers to them. And I think if you can't figure out a way to do college, then it's pretty hard to figure out a way to do college football. TRR asks, are Pitt players staying at a hotel again during camp like in 2017? I'm not sure. I think they've done that in the years since then. They've got the hotel that's like right down the road from the training facility. Literally, you can walk there. And so I think they've done that the last couple years. I would assume they would do that again, although I'm not sure. Guys might be staying in their apartments. I do think there's been some quarantine period, and they're hoping and trying to keep these guys smart. I just don't think you could put them all into hotels during the, throughout the fall semester and expect them to stay put. I just don't know if you can control them that way. Royce Beacom points out that the governor of New York says no attendance at college football games this fall in New York, specifically Syracuse. How does the ACC continue with that? I mean, look, each school is going to have to go by its local guidelines, right? And state and local government is going to, those bodies are going to make rules about what kind of groups can come together. And if Tom Wolf says you can't have gatherings of more than 250 people in Pennsylvania, Pitt and Penn State and Temple aren't going to be able to have more than 250 people at their games. Shoot, you might have more than 250 people just between the players, the refs, the coaches, the trainers. They're going to have to try and find some sort of exemption. I guess maybe they want to claim that one sideline is a separate, gathering from the other sideline, and you would never have more than 250 people in one area of sort of defined size. You know what I mean? You say, look, we've got this field that's, X number of yards from sideline to sideline. I always forget how wide a football field is. Somebody will tell us in the comments. But we've got this space. So all together in this stadium, we might have 500 people, but we've got them spread out. So you'll never have more than 250 in one place at one time. I think that's probably how they would get around that, if that's what the restriction ends up being. But every state and every municipality or whatever, every local government is going to have its own rules, and the teams are going to have to deal with that. It sure seems like Georgia Tech's not going to have any issues, or at least no legal issues. They might have some health issues, but they're not going to have any legal issues since Georgia doesn't seem to want, the state of Georgia doesn't seem to have much interest in mandates or restrictions. But I think Georgia Tech plays up here this year anyway, so that's neither here nor there. But I mean, that's what'll happen is you'll have different situations at different games in different stadiums. It'll be different rules, and they'll have to adjust as the season goes on. And you know what? Over the course of the season, the rules in certain states and certain venues might change anyway. TRR asks, when can we expect the ACC to release the 10-game schedule for each team? I mean, they have to first announce that they're going to just play 10 games. I don't think they've officially made that announcement yet. I would imagine the next week or so is when they'll finally say, yeah, we're going to do a 10-game schedule. It's been rumored, it's been reported, but the ACC has said their only official statement, at least that I've seen, unless you've seen something different lately, and I missed it, the ACC has said, look, we haven't decided anything yet. We're considering a number of options, a number of scenarios. We haven't decided anything yet. We'll decide late in the month. So I would think in the next week and a half, obviously, that'll be the end of July. In the next week and a half, we'll find out actually what the ACC wants to do, and then you'll see it come out. And if it's a 10-game conference schedule, it'll be interesting to see if there's still overlap with the SEC, because some of these programs want to, ACC and SEC programs have annual rivalries that they want to maintain. Your Clemson, South Carolina, your Georgia Tech, Louisville, Kentucky, Florida State. They want to maintain those. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of, how that is all filtered in. There's so many questions, and you feel like you could spend all of your time trying to answer all the questions. So we're going to switch gears. I wanted to talk recruiting a little bit because actually in the time since we spoke last week, some news came out. Trevion Stevenson, defensive end, linebacker, prospect, outside linebacker, going to grow into a defensive end in college. Prospect out of Virginia, decided to decommit from Pitt. Took the commitment list from 18 down to 17. Took one of the defensive linemen off the list. They only have one. They had two, the other being Nikai Johnson from West Mifflin. You take Stevenson off the list, they're down to one. Stevenson, a couple of days later, ended up committing to North Carolina, and this happened. It happened last week, and it happened after we had done the podcast, the Tuesday night podcast. I forget which day it was, maybe Thursday. But it was after we did the Tuesday night podcast, but before Friday's 3-2-1 column on Panther-Lair.com, and then the Saturday Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan. So I was able to write about it in the 3-2-1 column. I was able to talk about it a little bit on the Panthers Insider Show, but I didn't really get a chance to dive into it here on the podcast. And that was what I really wanted to talk about tonight, is recruiting stuff and decommitments and recommitments and flipping commitments and all that kind of thing, because that was what I was sort of interested in. And it's what I've been thinking about a lot this week. We've written a lot about it on Panther-Lair.com. If you looked on Tuesday at Panther-Lair.com, we had a list of every recruit who has, I say decommitted, but that's not entirely the right word. It's recruits who were committed to Pitt at one point, but didn't sign with Pitt in that class. And I kind of, that's sort of, I make that specific because it includes a variety of guys that I think are worth mentioning. If you go over the course of Pat Narduzzi's time at Pitt, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 recruiting classes he has signed, starting with 2015, which is the class he inherited from Paul Christ when he was hired in December of 2014, all the way up through this class that signed that'll be freshman this year, this class of 2020. So not even including Trevion Stevenson. He would be outside this group. But if you look over those 6 recruiting classes, you've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 17 kids from 2015 through 2020. 6 recruiting classes, 17 guys who were committed to Pitt at one point, but ended up not signing with Pitt. And your biggest group, you have to turn back the clock a ways. Your biggest group was 2015, which was that class that Narduzzi inherited from Paul Christ, where you had a bunch of guys, and then some of them decided not to stick with Pitt. Now, there were a few that were probably always going, like Nick Bowers, the tight end from Katanning, Kevin Givens, linebacker, who ended up becoming a defensive lineman out of Altoona. Those guys both ended up going to Penn State. Bowers got his offer from Penn State that fall during his senior season. And the truth is, he probably was going to go to Penn State even if Paul Christ was still there. I don't know. It's not really on Narduzzi that he lost him. Kevin Givens was a very late offer by Penn State, but he's in Altoona. That's the spot, right? That's sort of the heart of or at least it's sort of the southern heart of Penn State country. Was Kevin Givens, and he ends up flipping to Penn State on signing day. So those were 2 guys, and then 2 guys followed Paul Christ to Wisconsin. Alex Hornibrook, the quarterback out of Eastern PA, and Craig Howe, defensive tackle out of Ohio. And then the 5th one from that 2015 class, who was committed to Pitt but ended up going to a different school, was Sean Curtis, a defensive end linebacker prospect from Florida. And he was actually the only one who committed to Narduzzi but then ended up flipping. He committed to Narduzzi in January of 2015, and about a week or 2 later, he flipped to Ole Miss and ended up signing with Ole Miss. Now, you look at these 5 guys, and Givens left early for the NFL. He went undrafted, signed as a rookie free agent with the San Francisco 49ers. Bowers, started 2 games, caught 17 passes over the course of his career. Sean Curtis never really did much. He only played a handful of games and, left Ole Miss before the bulk of his career, or before his eligibility was over, I should say. Craig Howe, the defensive tackle, went to Wisconsin, played in 1 game over the course of 4 years. And, so there wasn't much there. Really, the one from that 2015 class that Pitt probably could have used was Alex Hornibrook, the quarterback. He went to Wisconsin and ended up being pretty good. He was a 3-year starter. He went 26-6 over 3 seasons. And then at the end of his 4th season at Wisconsin, at the end of his 3 years as a starter, he went to Florida State as a graduate transfer and really, I don't know if that was the best decision, although it seemed like he was going to get passed over at Wisconsin, in his redshirt senior season. And at Florida State, he made 3 starts, but he ended up being the backup. So those were the 5 guys from that class. And you see sort of a similar trend as you go through the recruits who decommitted over the subsequent classes. Juwan Winfrey, wide receiver, went to Colorado. He was a guy who had been at Maryland as a freshman in 2014. Got suspended at the end of that season, got suspended again in the following summer, and decided instead of sitting out for a full year in 2015, he would go to junior college and then find a new school. He did. He committed to Pitt in December of 2015, part of a big commitment rush for Pat Narduzzi. And then there were some differences between the staff and Winfrey. I think there were some character concerns, and Pitt more or less let him go. It was something of a mutual decision, but I think it was initiated by the coaching staff. And he ended up at Colorado, had a decent 2-year career at Colorado, and I think he was like a 4th-round draft pick or something like that for the Broncos. I believe he's still there. I had that info right in front of me. No, he's a 6th-round pick of the Broncos in last year's draft, and he played in 3 games last season. The other one from that 2016 class, and this is a name if you've followed recruiting for the last 5 years or so, the guy from the 2016 class was Tony Butler. And Butler committed to Pitt and then took a visit like 2 days later to Ohio State, and then he reaffirmed his commitment to Pitt and then took other visits and reaffirmed his commitment to Pitt. It went back and forth over the course of like 2 or 3 months before finally Pitt was like, Tony, you're with us or you're not. And let's be honest, you're not. And so Tony Butler said, you're right. And he ended up going to Nebraska. He made the All-Big Ten academic team a few times. Played in 27 games, had 3 tackles, all on special teams over the course of his career. That's about where his career went. 2017 class, there was only one that I could remember of a decommitment, and that was Exree Lowe, who was actually the first commitment in the 2017 class. He committed the summer before his junior year. Kid out of Johnstown, safety, outside linebacker prospect. He committed a couple months before Paris Ford did. Paris Ford wasn't the first recruit to commit in that 2017 class. It was actually Exree Lowe. Lowe ended up, committing before his junior year. A year later, it just wasn't working out. He was still taking visits to other schools. Pat Narduzzi really kind of gets uptight about that. And they also weren't really blown away by his junior film. He didn't have a great performance at their prospect camp, and they parted ways. He ended up at West Virginia, and started a couple games last year, played in a bunch of games, and he's, if they have a season in 2020, he'll be in the mix for the starting job. He'll be in the competition there. So, playing like an outside linebacker role. 2018 has a couple interesting guys. Alaimo and Jay Simmons. Alaimo is interesting because he was a tight end. That's certainly something that Pitt has needed. They signed 3 tight ends in 2017, and it seemed like they were going to build on that success by getting Alaimo in 2018. Well, Alaimo was committed, and it was December, right before signing day, and he took his official visit, and I think there were some differences between him and his family and the coaching staff. He ended up going to UCLA for a year and then transferring to Rutgers, so moved around a little bit. The other guy was Jay Simmons, who was, we list him as a tight end on Rivals.com, but he was actually a fullback. And I think Pitt offered him, and I don't think they thought he was going to commit right away. I think they wanted to take their time with him, but you play this game in recruiting where you have to kind of, there are some guys that are obvious no-brainers. Yes, we want to offer him right now, and I would, sing to high heavens if he wants to commit right now. But there's some middle ground where you offer, and you're offering, not that you would turn down his commitment. You want to be a man of your word. That if you sit down with a kid and say, we want to offer you a scholarship, and that kid says, I want to take it, you say, okay. But you do play the game a little bit. You try to read situations. And I think they looked at it and said, okay, we're going to offer him because we want to have him. We want to be in a position to, have that relationship forged with him. But I don't think they thought he was going to commit right away, and he did. He committed sooner than they thought. And I don't think they were necessarily 100% sold on taking a scholarship fullback. And I think that was in the spring of 2017. He was in the 2018 class. It was the spring of 2017, so the tail end of his junior year of high school. And by October or so, he had gotten an offer from Stanford, and Pitt was more than willing to let him go. And so they moved on, and he moved on and went to Stanford. And he actually played a handful of games in 2018 and still redshirted. One of the games he played in was the Sun Bowl, actually, against Pitt. And then he played, I think, in every game last season. So maybe someone they could have used. I don't know. We can go back and forth about the role of the fullback and how important it is and whether he could have made a difference in their running game last year. I'm not sure how much Mark Whipple would really have used a fullback. I mean, I think, Jay Simmons in a George Aston role of Matt Canada's offense, maybe that would have made a little more sense. Maybe. But, I mean, George Astons don't grow on trees, man. George Astons are the trees. You know what I'm saying? So they're not easy to find. The metaphor kind of fell apart there, but it was a cool phrase at first, right? George Astons don't grow on trees. They are the trees. Should have just left it at that. The class of 2019 is where the decommitments started rising again, and for a very specific reason. The class of 2019, that summer of 2018, is when the NCAA allowed recruits to start taking official visits in the spring. And this was pretty important because it led to a real run on early commitments. And you had a bunch of guys take official visits in June, and you're always going to have a June rush on commitments. That's part of it. Every year you see Pitt get a lot of commitments in June. But it was exacerbated. It was heightened that year because you had all these guys on campus for official visits in June, and a lot of them turned into commitments. I think Pitt got like 13 commitments that month or something like that. And it was inevitable that you were going to have some of those guys back off of their commitments. I think it was just, and I think we said it at the time. I don't know if we predicted specific guys who would decommit, but I think it was inevitable that some guys were going to decommit at some point. And the reason we said that is because, and we've talked about this before, you had these guys on campus for official visits, and it's great, and it's amazing. They have an awesome time, and they commit, and they love it, and it's June. And then by like October, it's been 4 months since they've been on Pitt's campus. And they're hearing from other schools. And it's November. And now it's December. And they're a couple weeks away from signing. But some of these other schools are saying, man, come and visit us. You don't want to sign having only taken one official visit, do you? You get 5 official visits. Come see it. Just come check us out. At least experience the recruiting process. And so guys go out and take a few visits. And they go. And they have an awesome time, an amazing experience, because that's what official visits are supposed to be. That's what they're supposed to do. And their Pitt official visit seems very far in the past. Can't remember what that was like. Think of it this way. They took their Pitt official visit in June. They're signing in December. So that's a 6-month difference. All right? So they're sitting there in the second week of December, having just gone to whatever school last weekend and had an awesome time, and that's fresh in their minds, and they're trying to remember back to 6 months ago when they went on their Pitt visit. 6 months ago from now was January of 2020. Quick, off the top of your head, tell me a very specific, vivid memory from January 2020. I don't have one. It seems like a really, really long time ago. Now, this is unique circumstances. A lot has happened since January of 2020. But you understand what I'm saying, though, that 6 months can be a long time when it comes to memories and experiences, particularly when you've got a much fresher memory. And so that's what happened in the class of 2019. Kadri Jackson, a linebacker, safety prospect, outside linebacker, kind of a hybrid guy out of Florida, Orlando area, came up to Pitt for a prospect camp in June, earned a scholarship offer, came back like a week later for an official visit, loved it, canceled the official visit he had planned to NC State for like the next week, and just committed. And that was it. And it was all great. He was solid. And then you get like late in the year, into November, Mack Brown gets hired at North Carolina. Tar Heels start showing interest. They convince him to take an official visit. You lost him. And he ended up signing with North Carolina. They had a few others that got away that year, too. Brandon Mack was a defensive end out of Alabama who committed to Pitt during an official visit in June. Mack was unique because he said from the start, I'm going to take other official visits. I'm going to go see some of these other schools. This has always been my plan. I'm committing now, but I'm going to go check out other schools. And he never faded from that. He took a visit to Missouri in the middle of the season. He took a visit to Florida Atlantic in the first week of December. And he said, I'm not signing in the early signing period. And I'll give him credit. He held to his word. and he didn't sign in the early signing period. And about a day after signing day in December, he said, I'm just decommitting. He ended up taking an official visit to Ole Miss in January, and he signed with the Rebels there. So that's two. Travis Koontz was another one, junior college tight end, who committed to Pitt with an official visit in June. And he was a little bit unique. You know, other schools continue to pursue him. But for Koontz, it was very important that he get involved in a passing offense. An offense that was going to throw the ball a lot and throw the ball to the tight end a lot. This was very important to Travis Koontz, okay? And so he commits in June of 2018. And he's excited about Pitt. He believes they're going to get the ball to the tight end. That's what he wants to do. He's got 2 years to go out and showcase himself as a pass-catching tight end to try and put himself in the NFL. And so he starts watching Pitt's offense in the beginning of the 2018 season, first half of the 2018 season. And you tell me, what did he see out of Pitt's offense in the first half of the 2018 season? And people want to talk about Travis Koontz was told that the tight ends are just going to block and this kind of thing. And there might have been some of that. There might have been some communication issues with Travis Koontz. But he also just watched Pitt's offense and said, they're going to have 2,000-yard rushers. All they're doing is running the ball. I mean, he probably didn't know they were going to have 2,000-yard rushers in October, but he definitely could see that all they were doing was running the ball. And he said, I need an offense that's going to throw the ball to the tight end. So he decommitted. He ended up signing with Texas Tech in December. I think he might have enrolled early. He played at Texas Tech. He played in all 12 games last season, actually. He caught 10 passes for 152 yards. I'm not going to, the Pitt coaches probably at this point would, mention the fact that for as much as Will Gregg and Nakia Griffin-Stewart struggled in 2019, they still did better than 10 for 152. And actually, they would probably even point out that Travis Koontz didn't like what he saw out of Pitt's passing offense in 2018. Okay, they would not. I was going to say they might point out the numbers that the tight ends ended up with in 2018. But they were not better than 10 for 152, so they might not point that out. So Koontz goes to Texas Tech. That's how they lost him. And then the one other was Nick Malone, an offensive lineman from West Virginia. He actually committed over the summer. He did not take an official visit. He just committed. He impressed the coaches at the prospect camp, got an offer. He ended up committing. His senior season wasn't really all that strong, though. And the coaches backed away from him because they didn't like what they saw, quite frankly, from his senior film. He ended up going to West Virginia as a walk-on. So that was kind of how he came off the list. And then finally you come to this last class, this 2020 recruiting class. 3 guys decommitted. Henry Parrish was the most prominent of the group, the running back from Miami, who committed and started his senior season with a bang. I mean, just was dominant, and he was dominant all year long. And you knew schools were going to be involved with him. He was in a prominent area, playing for a prominent school, and just looking really, really good out there. And it's sort of the opposite of Koontz, because Henry Parrish really liked Charlie Partridge, really liked Pitt, liked everything about it, wanted to go to Pitt, but he's getting these interests from these other schools, and he's watching Pitt's offense in 2019. And whereas Travis Koontz wanted to catch passes as a tight end and watched his future team's offense run the ball nonstop, Henry Parrish wants to go to college and run the ball, wants to go to college and be a running back, right? And he's watching his future team throw the ball 40 times a game. And you had sort of this a similar effect. Not exactly the same, but a similar effect. And I think, the combination of new interest and Pitt not really running the ball, not committing to the run, it led Henry Parrish to ultimately flip to Ole Miss. I think it was pretty clear he was going to leave Pitt at some point. He was going to decommit, but he ended up going to Ole Miss. It was a question of where, not so. It was a question of where and when more than it was a question of if or would he. They also lost T. Denson, defensive back who had committed over the summer during an official visit. He flipped to Kansas State, and I didn't have a great read on that situation. I think Pitt wanted to hold on to him. I don't think the coaches tried to run him off or anything like that. I think he liked getting the interest, and you see that a lot of times. I think there's something to be said for that with, the impetus for this whole conversation of Trevion Stevenson. I think he liked the recruiting interest. I think he liked the recruiting attention. And when you commit, sometimes some of that attention fades a little bit. And I think there are recruits who commit kind of early. The attention from the other schools might fade out, and they might take it upon themselves to try and foster some of that interest back up. I mean, I think we all can understand that, right? Not necessarily agree with it or say that we would do it in that situation. I don't know if that's what I would do, but I think you could imagine that happening where a kid would say, man, I was getting hit up all the time. I was getting all these sweet graphics, and then I committed, and it kind of fell off. Like, guys weren't really talking to me all that much anymore from these other schools. The coaches at the school I committed to, they were still talking to me nonstop. But these guys from these other schools weren't really talking to me all that much anymore. And I kind of liked it when they were. So maybe I need to, maybe not decommit, but maybe I need to reach out to schools and try and see if I can get some more offers in, try and cultivate some more interest and more attention. And I think there are guys who have decommitted from Pitt in the past couple years who maybe took that approach. And I think you see them on the decommitment list. So the third one from, we don't need to rip on kids specifically, so we don't need to name names, but I mean, I think there is some element of that has happened, in the recruiting process. And I think with some of these guys who have decommitted. And then the third one from the 2020 class was Timothy Brown, defensive lineman from Florida, committed over the summer, official visit. Then he got arrested during the season. And I think Pitt was hopeful that they could hold out, and they could keep him on the commitment list, and things would get resolved. They believed things would get settled. They believed they would be able to keep Timothy Brown in the fold and get him into school. But you got past the December signing day, and it just wasn't resolved. And so you got into January, and it was still not looking like it was going to get resolved. And I'm still not sure if it's gotten resolved yet for Tim Brown. And I feel bad for him, but I would say he found himself in an unfortunate situation, but I would also say he put himself in an unfortunate situation. Whether he's as guilty of the things that he was initially charged with, I mean, kidnapping and this kind of thing, I don't know any of the details. Okay, so I can't speak to one thing or the other, but it doesn't seem like the situation's been resolved, and it cost him his opportunity to go to Pitt. Probably cost him his opportunity to go to a Power 5 school, because I'm guessing he's not going to resurface at a power conference college. So that's what you have. There you have it. There you have it. You have 17 guys over the course of 6 recruiting classes who were committed to Pitt at one point and ended up not signing with Pitt. And I have to say it that way because Timothy Brown never signed with another school. I could say they were committed to Pitt at one point and ended up at another school, which would apply to 16 out of the 17. But we include Tim Brown in this conversation because he was committed to Pitt and then went off the list. As you look through that whole group, though, particularly the guys who have already played a few years of college, I'm not sure which one, if any, really jumps out at you as saying, boy, they could have used that guy. Boy, that one really stung. Now, there's something to be said for the fact that a significant percentage of every recruiting class never really becomes, big-time contributors. And so this isn't just picking on the guys who left. And, who knows what Juwan Winfrey, the wide receiver, would have done in Pitt's offense. He would have come in the recruiting class of 2016, so he'd have been there in 16 and 17 and 18. And, they probably could have used him, particularly in 2018. They probably could have used him at wide receiver. Who's to say what Matt Alaimo might have done? He would have had 2 years on campus so far. Maybe he could have improved the tight end group last year. Maybe Travis Koontz could have improved the tight end group last year. And you still, with a guy like Kadri Jackson or Brandon Mack, certainly Henry Parrish, you don't know what those guys are going to become in their careers. Kadri Jackson played in every game last year at North Carolina as a true freshman. Some linebacker, mostly special teams, but he played in every game. He was good enough to get himself on the field. I think he could be one down the road that we say, boy, they really missed on him. It would have been really good to hold on to him and keep him in the defense down the road. But I'll tell you one that I would think when you look back at the past results, a guy who maybe could have helped the most, I might almost be inclined to say Alex Hornibrook. And, Hornibrook, 26-6 in his 3-year career at Wisconsin. He was never a game breaker. He was never, this sensational playmaking, quarterback who changed the game. But he was really solid. He was really effective. I hate to say game manager, but it's true. But he threw 47 touchdown passes, completed 60% of his passes, threw for 5,000 yards over the course of 3 years as a starter. If you put him on Pitt's teams, let's not even say 2015 and 16, okay? Let's say he comes in, he redshirts in 15, and sits as a redshirt freshman behind Nate Peterman in 2016. Let's say that the situation unfolds the way it did. And you get to 2017. You don't have Ben DiNucci on the roster. You probably have Kenny Pickett. You have Thomas McVitie. We'll say you have those guys, okay? We'll say everything sort of follows the same. It's just they sign Alex Hornibrook in 15 instead of Ben DiNucci. So you get to 2017. You've got a competition between McVitie as a redshirt freshman, Hornibrook as a redshirt sophomore, and Kenny Pickett as a freshman. Now, do they still bring in Max Brown? I don't know. It depends on what they think of Alex Hornibrook. Now, Hornibrook was good enough to take over the starting job during the season as a redshirt freshman at Wisconsin. You would think as a redshirt sophomore at Pitt, the coaches might have had some confidence in him. Maybe they still bring in Max Brown, so you have some competition. You've got a little bit of experience depth. But, 17 is really the season I would circle and say, would Pitt still have been 5-7 with Alex Hornibrook at quarterback instead of your combination of Max Brown, Ben DiNucci, and ultimately Kenny Pickett in that Miami game? I'm not sure how much of a difference he would have made. And I don't say that to mean that I'm leaning toward him not making much of a difference. I genuinely don't know. I think he was a pretty good player, pretty solid player at Wisconsin, arguably more solid than Pitt's quarterback play was in 2017 or 2018. But he also had a much better offensive line at Wisconsin, a much better running game at Wisconsin, although they had a pretty good running game at Pitt at 2018. I wonder if that would be the one that stung the most, and I wonder how much, 2017 and 18, they won 12 games total between those two seasons. I wonder what that win total would have been with Alex Hornibrook at quarterback instead of, like I said, your combination of Max Brown, Ben DiNucci, and Kenny Pickett. I think Hornibrook might have been the one. But then, you get it, you start butterfly affecting it. And, if Hornibrook's there, if he wins the starting job in 17, he's got it in 17. He holds on to it in 18. I'm sure Thomas McVitie's gone. What does Kenny Pickett do? Kenny Pickett then redshirts in 17. He's a redshirt freshman in 2018. I guess maybe, is he willing to wait until his redshirt junior year? Because he would be a redshirt freshman in 2018, a redshirt sophomore in 2019, when Hornibrook would be a senior. Is he going to wait till his redshirt junior year? Is Kenny Pickett going to wait 4 years to get on the field, or is he going to go too? But then does that open up, 2020 as a wide open quarterback race between Davis Bevell and, Joey Ellen and whoever else is here? I don't know. It's hard to predict what, one move after another, how one change would affect down the line. But I guess I would just circle 2017 and 2018 specifically and say, how would Alex Hornibrook have changed Pitt's record and fate? I think he would have done. You would like to think that he could have been more effective as a passer in 2018 than Kenny Pickett was. You would like to think that he would have been able to build off that running game better than Kenny Pickett did. And that's not to put the struggles in 2018 on Kenny Pickett exclusively. Sean Watson got fired for that year, for the performance that season. But I wonder what it would have looked like with Hornibrook instead of Pickett and the other characters that he that came before him. All right, let's go to the let's get some of the conversation here as we go to the youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com live chat. Nicholas Timperio, I think Pitt gets Elliott Donald on Friday. However, the record with legacy recruits makes me nervous. Yeah, Elliott Donald, 4-star defensive lineman from Central Catholic, committing on Friday, announcing his commitment on Friday. That's the plan. I think Pitt will get him as well. You're right, Nicholas. They haven't always done well with legacy recruits. For some reason, legacies don't tend to go to Pitt, but I think they will get. I think they will get Elliott Donald. I think you get him, and you've got the two best defensive linemen locally, in Elliott Donald and Nikai Johnson, with a great chance of getting Dorian Ford, defensive lineman out of Baldwin. So I think there's a real chance that you might be able to sweep the Whippeal in that really strong class of Whippeal defensive linemen. You might be able to get them all, and I think at the very least you'll get 2 out of 3. And I think those two will be Nikai Johnson and Elliott Donald, which is pretty strong. Let's see. Zach W., do you think the ACC Coastal is one of the strongest football conferences this season? So I'll debate it on Twitter. It has a decent argument. I can't really get there with you, Zach. I mean, I think people are underrating Pitt. I think North Carolina is getting underrated to some extent. I think at some point with Miami, if you flip a quarter 50 times in a row and call heads 50 times, eventually it's got to come up heads. Eventually they have to be pretty decent. Virginia Tech, we'll see. Don't have high expectations for Georgia Tech yet. Don't have high expectations for Duke. Don't have high expectations for Virginia. So, how good are they going to be? It's probably ultimately going to come down to if they're able to be competitive with each other, and then if one of them can go and beat or give Clemson a really, really strong game in the ACC championship. That's what it'll come down to. And I'm not sure if those things could have happened. Sam Smallwood says, I played against Nick Bowers in high school. I wish he would have stayed committed at Pitt. Yeah, I think Bowers is a decent player. And given Pitt's trouble with recruiting tight ends under this coaching staff, they probably could have used Nick Bowers in that 2015 recruiting class. I think it would have definitely built up some of the depth, and avoided some of the depth issues that they developed in later years. But Bowers, I think he was always going to Penn State. I don't even think Paul Christ and Joe Rudolph could have kept him at Pitt. I think that was always going to happen. Let's see. Sam Smallwood also says, did Tyler Sear from Neshannock transfer, or did he simply leave the team? All I can remember from his time at Pitt was his fight in the dorm with Paris Ford over a video game. Right. So Tyler Sear left the team, or was kicked off the team, or was a mutual decision, or somehow he departed from the team in 2018, midpoint of the season. He ended up transferring to Temple. I want to say he sat out. He might have played last season. He might have gotten a waiver for immediate eligibility and played last season. I forget exactly if he did. I could actually look that up right now. I think I've looked it up before. Let me check. Tyler Sear at Temple. I think he did. Yeah, he had to sit out. No, he didn't. He was granted a waiver. I'm not sure. He got granted a waiver after the season had already started, so I don't know how many games he actually played, but he did transfer to Temple. TRR, Tyler Sear and Chris Clark, so much hype, and both left the program. I just remember Sear with a bad face mask penalty versus UCF near the ninth sideline in that blowout loss. Yeah, I had high expectations for Tyler Sear. I thought he could be a J.P. Holtz type of player. Maybe that's because he was from Western PA and kind of seemed like a tough guy, sort of had a similar build to J.P. Holtz. I thought Sear could be a J.P. Holtz type. It just didn't work out. And Chris Clark is a gifted athlete. There's no question about it. Remember, he transferred in from UCLA. He had been committed to a couple of different schools, and he ends up going to UCLA, transfers after a couple games, leaves the team after a couple games, I should say, and ends up transferring to Pitt. Didn't play in 2016 because he got hurt, but also because the NCAA didn't give him immediate eligibility. And then, played in 2017, and I think left the team after that. It just, he had, whatever you want to call it, some personality issues, I guess, that just worked against him. But he was a heck of an athlete. He's a great player. It just never worked out. Josh Newark says, I always thought Alex Hornibrook had a weak arm, but he was a winner and most definitely would have been better than what Pitt was throwing out there. And yeah, I mean, it was a mess in 2017 with Max Brown, Ben DiNucci, and even Kenny Pickett at points. It wasn't very good, the quarterback situation. I mean, there were a number of issues for that team in 2017, but quarterback was definitely one. And it would be really interesting to see what Hornibrook would have done on that team and the 2018 team if he would have been able to win a couple more games and not go 7-7 in 2018. Richard Tenza, Chris, it seems like the PR department at Pitt is working overtime and doing a great job. Everyone is on some sort of watch list. Is this a lot of hype, or are those guys that good? Well, yeah. So, I mean, the thing with watch lists, and you're seeing these all coming out right now, the watch list for the various awards, to get on a watch list, it's usually a submission and nomination by the school, by the university, by the PR department, the sports information department. And so, I mean, the committees that choose these awards and put together the watch list, they do, they take the nominations under consideration, but you don't put every guy that gets nominated on the list. They do narrow it down a bit. But, I mean, I think the names you're seeing that are showing up on watch lists, Paris Ford and Jalen Twyman and Patrick Jones, I mean, these guys, Jimmy Morrissey, these guys have earned it. I mean, these guys have the resume to belong on a watch list for a major national award. They are that good. And Pitt is doing a good job of marketing these guys to the award committees. But they're good enough, and I think they deserve to be on those watch lists because they are that good. Royce Beacom, as we're talking about decommits, the recruits that left Pitt. Let me see. Royce Beacom says, what about the other direction with decommits coming to Pitt? What are he mentions Tamarian Crumpley, a defensive back who decommitted from Minnesota. Pitt has a chance at him. I think they have other defensive backs higher on the board. We'll talk about him later in the week on Panther-Lair.com. But yeah, Panarduzzi, as I talk about recruits that have left Pitt, and I said, 17 over the course of 6 recruiting classes. If you go the classes of 2016 through 2020, so 5 classes, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, they've had like 27 recruits who are committed to other schools end up signing with Pitt. So in terms of decommits or recruits who flip, Pitt is a net positive by about 10. I mean, you run down the list. Aaron Matthews, Phil Campbell, Elias Reynolds, Justin Morgan, Keyshawn Camp, Rashad Weaver, Amir Watts, George Hill, all committed to other schools and then ended up at Pitt. They weren't necessarily flips. They didn't all go from their school to Pitt immediately, but they were committed and they ended up at Pitt. 2017, Damari Mathis, Jason Pinnock, Desmond Alexandra, Tyler Sear, Todd Sibley, Kenny Pickett. Pickett was committed to Temple, if you recall. 2018, Michael Salahudin, Habakkuk Baldonado, Valik Carter, Shaki Jacques Louis, Kmar Mims. 2019, Servassier Dennis he had actually signed with Air Force, got out of his letter of intent before he committed to Pitt. Will Gibson, AJ Woods, Nate Temple. 2020, this last year's class, Rashad Battle had been committed to Maryland, Buddy Mack had been committed to Charlotte, and Ben Sauls, the kicker, was committed to Iowa State, and he ended up at Pitt. They actually have one in the 2021 class already. Noah Bigelow, cornerback, was committed to Iowa State. So you see a few show up a few times. Iowa State, Pitt got Noah Bigelow in this class, Ben Sauls last year, and then Valik Carter in the 2018 class. My favorite is Rutgers, though. 3 guys in the 2016 class, Phil Campbell, Elias Reynolds, and Justin Morgan, all flipped from Rutgers to Pitt. And then in the 2018 class, Kmar Mims flipped from Rutgers to Pitt. Rutgers doesn't like Pitt very much. And actually, after getting all those guys in the 2016 class in December of 2015, there started being these rumors about how Pat Narduzzi was interested in the Rutgers job. Where would rumors like that come from? It couldn't be rumors that were planted by people at Rutgers because they were mad about Narduzzi taking their recruits, but it's pretty funny. Let's see here. Few other questions. Let's see. Josh Newark, honest answer. You appear to have more negative reaction to 2020 recently, and you haven't been drinking a cold one during the live stream. Is that a coincidence? No, it's not a coincidence. I've been more negative about the prospects of football in 2020 because, well, brother, I'm living life in 2020. And I look around and I see what's going on in the world, and it's hard not to have some negativity slip in. And it's really difficult, and this will be sort of our final thoughts here. I like to think that this podcast and this live stream we do on Tuesday nights, I know it sort of offers this for me, and I hope it does for you too, you guys who tune in every Tuesday night, and anybody who listens to the podcast through the week. I'd like to think it offers some kind of a respite between just a place where we can not think about masks, we can not think about riots, we can not think about politics, we can not think about leadership or the lack thereof, where we can just for a little while, for an hour, we can set those things aside. We can just take a break from it. And it's tough, and I run into this problem on the message boards too. When I'm trying to moderate the message boards, we don't want to have political conversations on the message boards, right? We don't need debates about Donald Trump or Joe Biden or masks or the coronavirus or any of those things. We don't need those things on the message board. It's a sports message board, and people do come to the message board for a break from those other things, a bit of a safe haven, a safe space where they can just talk about sports and not get bogged down in politics and not get bogged down in those other things. And I like to think of this podcast the same way. But you know what? Things are tangled up, man. There are connections. We can't talk about Pitt and the 2020 season without at least mentioning the fact that season might not happen. And it's really hard. And I was explaining this to somebody the other day at a reader on the message board, sent me an email, and he was like, man, I just can't take it anymore. You've got to get this political crap off the boards. I can't read it. And I said, look, I understand. And I do. I get a lot of it off of there. I delete a lot of messages. I move a lot of things. I eliminate a lot of those political threads when they show up on the message board. But the reality is it's not too difficult to go from point A to point B to point C, where point A is, man, Pitt should have a great team this season. Pitt should win double-digit games. We've had this conversation on the board. Pitt should win double-digit games. With the defense they have coming back, if the offense gets just a little bit better, they should win 10 games this year. All right, good conversation. That's all sports, right? And then it starts going from point A to point B. Point B is, man, it would really suck if they've got this team that should win 10 games and they don't get to play 10 games, or they only get to play 10 games, or the season gets canceled or gets shortened or gets postponed or gets put off to the spring and a bunch of their guys leave so they don't actually have this team. It would be really unfortunate if we're not going to get to see this team play a full regular season, a standard, traditional, normal season. Right? And it's not hard to get from point A to point B in that conversation, right? I mean, that's natural. I sit around with somebody, I see somebody at the gym or someplace, and we're talking about Pitt, and they're like, we're talking about how good this team should be. Inevitably, somebody's going to say, yeah, if they actually get to play this year. It's a natural progression, okay? But we're still not in politics yet. Right? We're still talking about sports. We're bemoaning the fact that a very good team might not get a chance to show what it can do. But we've still only gone from point A to point B. But once you're at point B, it's not hard to get to point C, which is, why the aren't they going to have a season this year? How did it get this bad? How did the problem get out of control? Why wasn't more done to prevent this from happening? Why have we not spent the last 5 months, 4 months, making this happen, doing what we need to do, and then point C goes to point D, which point D is, why is this situation what it is nationally? Why have we not been able to control this pandemic? Why has this gotten out of control the way it has when you look at other countries around the world and they have seemingly found a way to get it under control? You see what I did? This is not a this is not a political podcast. You don't care about my political beliefs, and I didn't even give you my political beliefs. But by saying what I said just now, if I put that on the message board, somebody's going to come back and say, something pro-Trump. And take what I said as being anti-Trump. And then somebody's going to come back and say something pro-Trump. And then there we go. And we've got it back and forth. And now we've gone from point A, point B, point C, point D, rather naturally, with nobody forcing it to be about politics, because you can't separate these things. And we can sit here on this podcast. I just talked for 45 minutes about the 17 kids who decommitted from Pitt between 2015 and 2020. And we can do that. And we will do that. And we can talk about the depth chart at safety. And we can talk about the recruiting needs and how Pitt might have its best WPIAL recruiting class in 7 years, which I actually think is going to happen. And we'll talk about that next week. We can talk about all these things. And we will talk about all these things. And we will have that break, that haven, that respite from the political stuff. But we also, you can't pretend like these things are not all connected. So, I'm not going to stand here and preach about politics. I know what I believe. And I think what I believe is the reasonable and rational, theory or approach to this situation. But we don't need, so I guess I feel like we don't need to talk about it here, because everyone should have sort of the same view on it. I would think, I would hope. But you see how it gets from A to B to C to D. Pretty naturally, without anybody forcing the issue, forcing it to be about politics. It just, it becomes, because they're all connected. They're all tangled together. Anyway. Thanks for tuning in tonight. As we got sidetracked there at the end. I really do appreciate everybody who checked in on the live stream, had the great conversations there. Everybody's, Leon Moore 23, totally agree. It's good to have a break. Could talk and listen to Pitt Talk all day. Dale Gribble says, I love this podcast because Pittsburgh media doesn't give Pitt any attention, at least on the news. This is what we're here to do, man. We're here to talk about Pitt sports. And remember, if you want more Pitt sports talk, more Pitt sports content, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, you find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Panther-Lair.com. Every Tuesday night at 8:30, we do this live stream. We can have a conversation. Royce Beacom says, by all means, leave a thumbs up for Chris. That's right. If you're watching this live stream, like the stream, but then find a way to click to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's the key. I like the likes on this stream. That's awesome, but subscribe to the channel. We need that help as well. And then you'll get notifications when we go live every Tuesday night at 8:30 to talk a little bit of Pitt sports right here. Of course, you can get the podcast throughout the week. We are on Spotify now. Search for the Panther-Lair podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Libsyn, Apple, iTunes, all those places. We've got the podcast out there. You can listen to it. Friday, we've got our Friday Conversation podcast. Last week, talked to Terry Totten, Central Catholic head coach. Really interesting conversation talking about how recruiting has changed in the last 15 years. Some of his guys who have gone on to play at Pitt. Elliot Donald, who's currently one of his players. Really interesting stuff. It was fun to talk to him. So make sure you check that out. We do a Friday conversation. We have a guest every week on our Friday podcast. And then on Saturday, we get the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan here in Pittsburgh. So check that out. Good conversations, fun Pitt talk. If you like Pitt sports talk, those are the places to go. The Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair podcast, Friday Conversation podcast, Panthers Insider Show. We're all over the place. So thanks again for tuning in to the podcast. Thanks for stopping by here on Tuesday night at the live stream. We'll be back next Tuesday night for another live stream at 8:30. Between now and then, have a good time. Have a safe, happy, healthy time, and we will, have a good week, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.